I think America as a culture right now, we're kind of falling down. And we've done it because we've done it in the similar ways. Our politicians have enriched themselves and they've, voted themselves more power and they really don't care about the people they're representing. So we've gotten this strange position where we're looking at, kind of this forlorn day of the past. And I think that's to me why people are looking at the Roman Empire. But at the same time, I don't know if you follow Darren Beatty at all. He talks about like with where America's at right now, we're kind of like the American globalist empire in a way,
Mm.
because we've become the army pushing a lot of these things forward rather than actually like going for liberty and going for freedom. Instead, like we're going around the world and kind of enforcing our will on people.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We've got a special guest today, Jeremy Ryan Slate. The thing that's most notable about you to me, and I think probably the most topical at this moment, is that you studied early Roman Empire propaganda. So, because that's the question now for men is how often do you think of the Roman Empire?
Interestingly enough, I don't know. I've been seeing that thread popping up, man. But like, what actually got that whole thing going?
Who the fuck knows? I mean, it's like, here's what I think it is actually. Our parents' generation, at some point in their lives, men became obsessed with World War II, and maybe it's just a function of the History Channel making all the content.
Sure.
Who knows? But that was a thing that happened, and I am also. I mean, I was a soldier, so I'm obsessed with all warfare. But I think that there's been this rediscovery of the Stoics, maybe, and that's why people have become obsessed with Roman culture again. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like I was like into that stuff before it was cool, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm almost 37 and like I was into that stuff as like a, 10-year-old man.
Right.
So it's like for me, it's always been interesting. And the way what I studied in school is I was looking at actually the propaganda that Augustus Caesar used to convince people he was divine.
Mm.
Because if you get into that whole thing, that's crazy interesting, man, of like how a politician, especially in that time period, is easier to do, but for instance, these people he's God. Like that's crazy.
Well, they were polytheistic society, so I guess it's a little easier then to do it maybe than it would have been. Although it wasn't terribly difficult for, first century Christians to convince people that a carpenter was God either. So,
Well, because if you look at it this way, man, like I think the thing that's different is like people then like they thought like, gods and men were walking around at the same time. Like the veil was a lot thinner to them, if
sure,
that
yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So like it was much, much more believable. Like
Especially with
Julius,
Greek and Roman mythology, right? I mean, that was kind of part of the culture, I guess.
Yeah. So I think when you look at it, I think people are interested in that because, I think America as a culture right now, we're kind of falling down. And we've done it because we've done it in the similar ways. Our politicians have enriched themselves and they've, voted themselves more power and they really don't care about the people they're representing. So we've gotten this strange position where we're looking at, kind of this forlorn day of the past. And I think that's to me why people are looking at the Roman Empire. But at the same time, I don't know if you follow Darren Beatty at all. Do you follow Darren Beatty Revolver.news at all?
No, I don't.
Okay, so he talks about like with where America's at right now, we're kind of like the American globalist empire in a way,
Mm.
because we've become the army pushing a lot of these things forward rather than actually like going for liberty and going for freedom. Instead, like we're going around the world and kind of enforcing our will on people.
Yeah, it's weird how that turned, isn't it? I mean, we went from a revolutionary war of ideas, certainly, to some interesting conflicts through the early part of the 19th century, then to the Civil War, and then to the Monroe Doctrine almost directly after that. Not directly, not immediate after that, but that was kind of the side as we were becoming hegemons of North America, North and South America. The idea that like, all right, we're here in the Americas, we'll deal with this. Europe, you deal with your own problems, right? That was generally the sentiment that we had about it. To then getting involved in two world wars and two not so great ones in Korea and Vietnam to suppress communism, and it's like those were all kind of driven from the American political left, but there was a lot of toppling and nation building right? Which is not something that you would expect from a country that founded itself on the principles of federalism and decentralized power, right?
But that's a lot about how, if you bring back the parallel of the Roman Empire, that's a lot of what happened in the later years. And you're looking at, I think it was 476 when the Roman Empire fell. So like in that time period, that's kind of what it had become, a series of weak leaders that were into some weird sexual shit. Like you can put that aside, but at the same time, it was a series of weak leaders. They're giving away citizenship to everybody else. So citizenship has no meaning. That's after Diocletian decides, hey, you know what? If you live in our territory, you're a citizen now. So there really was nothing to, no value to it, no value to actually being a part of it. And they continued to bring in these different empires. We're doing very similar things. And I think to me, that's the scary part, because you even look at the border problems we're having right now. We've lost value on what it means to be a citizen. I think New York State, they were looking at, with your driver's license now, when you get your driver's license, doing automatic voter registration. And it's like, well, what if you're not a citizen? How does that work? And that's the caveat that hasn't been addressed. So I think we're in this really rough position where if we get back to the ideas of the Constitution and enforce those things, we can do something about it. But we're kind of teetering on a razor's edge, man. Like if you look at it, a lot of what we're dealing with started in 1913 when we had the 17th Amendment, we had income tax, and we also had the Federal Reserve. Those are three things that, unless you do anything about them, we don't really get the ability to control our country anymore.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, and it wasn't just, when you're talking about the Roman Empire, it wasn't just weak leaders, but the leaders, and it wasn't just the emperor or before him, the Senate and tribune and shit. It was all of these assholes were using wars of conquest essentially to amass power and enrich themselves, which, you're not going to, there isn't a version where Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham and, their counterparts on the left become the governor of Yemen, right? And like you own property there, you've got a nice villa, you collect annual revenue from Yemen and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't work the same way. Right. But it certainly works insofar as General Dynamics, Raytheon, Lockheed, and Boeing spend billions, collect billions of dollars of revenue from taxpayers and then to redistribute those to these politicians, right? So they're still making their money. It's just in a more roundabout way, and we still call that an institution somehow. That's bizarre to me.
Well, and you got Gold Bar Bob here in New Jersey too. Have you heard that story about Bob Menendez?
Yeah, man.
He got off in 2017 from like picking up hookers, and now he basically was getting gold from a developer in Jersey City that was actually doing stuff for the government of Egypt. So I would love to see how many people in our government have things like that going on. And I think the corruption issue is a big problem too. But I think also if you look at bringing this back into the idea of the Roman Empire, it got too big as well, right? Because there was one emperor that ruled the Roman Empire when the first emperor being Augustus Caesar. But as it got bigger, you got two senior emperors and two junior emperors, because it got to be so big they couldn't control one emperor. And then you got to a situation where military commanders would be like, fuck that guy, I can do a better job than him. And then they would start rolling in and taking over. So you had like the year of 5 emperors, and you had all these things start to really get to the point where there wasn't really a stable political system as well. And it was just too freaking big, man. I think that's the problem we have here in the US is, as a country, if you look at it as a federal system, it's big, but that's why we have states' rights in the 10th Amendment, so that each state can kind of handle their stuff. And if there's a bigger problem, the federal government exists. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, we've got a very strange relationship with the Constitution now. A lot of people, and I think it's a reflection of the lackadaisical attitude and towards your own personal civil liberties, frankly. But there are, I think if you ask, a sizable amount of people, a good percentage of them would say that our rights are granted to us from the Constitution or from the government or something like that. And that couldn't be more wrong, right?
No,
if you read any of the other historical documents, they're consistently referred to as either God-given or natural rights, but depending on who the author was. And that they're simply enumerated on paper, right? And then the purpose of the Constitution wasn't to necessarily display our rights, but rather to show exactly where the government is not allowed to infringe,
Correct.
And it's, I want to get into this because you talk about education quite a bit, and we're fucked right now. I mean, primary education has been fucked since the early part of the 19th century, since the Department of Education came around. But even before that, if you listen to trendsetters and titans of industry from back then, Henry Ford, Rockefeller, people like that, they would very often and openly intimate that the purpose of public education is to create good workers, right? But that's not what the fucking purpose of education is. It's to create critical thinkers. Now, critical thinkers aren't going to, they're probably not going to be as compliant, I guess, you know? And it's interesting to me that we've become more educated and more compliant over the last 100 years or so. So like a version of American, as it were, that the founders would not recognize, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder what you think about that. Well, we'll get to secondary education in a moment, but for primary education, is it just, like, I like to apply hand lens eraser, is it just incompetence on these people's part? It's like it's easy, it's mass production of education, it's easier just to teach to the test and blah, blah, blah. And critical thinkers in the classroom are disruptive and blah, 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 whatever else. I can kind of see them, but man, I can only think of one reason that you would intentionally not teach people to think critically, and that's so you could take advantage of them.
Well, I think it didn't start there, but I think that's where it ended up. And because there's kind of two different parts that come into this. The first is being the system and how it started is essentially flawed. You know, you look at American education starting with the Horace Mann schools in the late 19th century out of Massachusetts. And that came into kind of the Industrial Revolution, right? And you need, like you were talking about, factory workers, people like that. But also the ideas of our school actually come out of the Austro-Hungarian model. And in that model, we were trying to make soldiers. So really all you wanted were people that could work on an assembly line and take orders. And that was simple and that you could mass produce that and whatever. But then what happens in the 70s and 80s, are you familiar with the work of James Lindsay at all?
Yes.
Okay, so James Lindsay follows the work of this guy, Paulo Freire, out of Brazil. And what Paulo Freire did is he took liberation theology, removed the theology ideas, and replaced that with Marxism. So you have this system that's essentially flawed, and they're trying to mass produce it. So then this guy in the 80s starts teaching these ideas. Some of his students follow this information and bring it back to the American schools of education, right, who trains our teachers. And then that information, now you have an assembly line, not just of people that follow orders and will do whatever. You also have people that are now being taught in a Marxist ideology in schools, and the teachers actually think that way because that's how they're schooled. So it becomes this really, as I said, I don't think it started out as a thing to be diabolical. I think it was more of an idea of this can easily be mass produced. We can do it everywhere. And where it's ended up is really it's become just a woke factory. And for me, that's why my kids are doing homeschool, because I am terrified of our public schools. I went to school in the 80s and 90s. And I barely survived grammar school because I was one of those really smart, high IQ kids. And in second grade, they had a meeting with my parents. And when I say they, I mean my teacher and the principal. There was no psychologist, psychiatrist, anybody like that present. They said, listen, this kid's got to go on drugs or he can't stay here. And they were, they wanted me to go on Ritalin at that point in time. And they're like, well, number one, who are you to tell us this? And number two, he's probably one of the smartest kids in the class. So we don't reward people for critical thinking and think outside the box. We figure out how to keep them in line with everybody else. So because of that, we don't create entrepreneurs. We don't create out of the box thinkers. And, that's where we're at now, man.
Yeah, it's weird. We wouldn't do that in any other industry, right? Like if somebody designed an automobile engine that was faster than everybody else's, there would be no public outcry, I guess, to slow that vehicle down or to make it less efficient or anything like that. But we do that with human beings.
There'd be lobbyists. The lobbyists
certainly,
would come in and be like,
certainly there would be lobbyists. But just generally speaking, inside of the business itself, nobody would think to do that because that's fucking dumb, right? But we do that to human beings a lot. We clip the wings of people very frequently, and I don't know. It's not always for the same reason. For the discoverers of the middle part of the millennia, I think it was wrapped up in religious power a lot. Like they wanted to be the primary access to God. They wanted to be the primary access of science and information and stuff like that. When somebody stepped out of line and challenged their worldview, they had to be dealt with. I get that part. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me why it's persisted, because we do have now they're doing very odd mind games. And perhaps that's why Marxism is making such a comeback. a low key comeback. I mean, it's not really low key if you're paying attention, but they're not calling it Marxism, is what I mean.
Right.
Maybe that's why it's making such a comeback, because it's a lot more complicated to talk to somebody that has all of this information and experience and still convince them to act against their own best interest, which they've been pretty effective at doing.
Well, it's interesting too, because I know like Kyle Seraphin, he's a guy that actually ended up leaving the FBI a number of years ago after he
Yeah,
saw
he
what
was
they
on
were
the
doing
show
with
last
people.
week.
Okay, cool. So he talks about too, like even what the FBI is looking for now, they want college educated people, right? Because they're schooled in a certain type of information. They don't want soldiers, they don't want police officers anymore, because those are people that will think outside of the box. And I think that's what our system has started to reward and create more of. So you even look at it and it's like, well, you went to undergrad, great. You should go to grad school. You should do this. You should do that. And when our society rewards more of that, people think they need more of that in order to survive. And it's made this thing you have to have. Where if you look at it, frankly, the biggest thing we're missing in our world right now is apprenticeships. And that's somebody that it's not the same as an internship. They work in a job for a period of time. They get paid for it, and they decide, do I like this? Don't I like this? Can I get some experience in this? They do it a lot in the trades, but they don't do it anywhere else anymore. And I think that is a giant thing that's missing. Instead of everybody goes to college, that is the major thing wrong with our system, because you're creating people that don't know how to apply the information they're getting because they can't apply it because it's flawed. And they're also creating all this debt. So to me, I think the major thing we have to do is college education should not be for everyone, man, but it's become like high school part two. And so everybody gets a BA. So now everybody needs an MA or a PhD, and it's kind of worthless at this point.
Yeah. It's, that's the, anything like that just gets turned into an industry. Whether it's like even social activism gets turned into an industry. That's why we'll get to a point where the majority of people believe that we are in or nearing a post-racial society, but then you'll start hearing about racist stuff again. You know what I mean? Because it's an industry. There are people making money off of selling their books or having their anti-racist institution, which is now failing. I'm shocked by that. But it's like this is the thing that puzzles me. All this information is available. You can get on the internet right now and look at the difference in pay scale and relative debt for a truck driver versus a first 5-year tech employee. And it's not even close, right? The truck driver is in a way better situation. A welder is in a way better situation than that tech employee. And this was 5 or 10 years ago. Today, it's probably going to extend way beyond their first 5 years, because now they're in crippling debt. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Not only they're in crippling debt, but they're paying rising rent costs because they can't afford a mortgage. And it's just going to continue like that, right? It's just, there's really no end in sight. There's not like there's no buffer period. It's like after World War II, there was the GI Bill, and it's largely responsible for creating what became the middle class in this country, right? Through VA home loans, where people make the majority, like the middle class makes the majority of their wealth through the equity in their home over the course of its lifetime. And then college educations, right, to differentiate, or apprenticeships. The VA or the GI Bill paid for all that stuff. Now I don't see what's coming, right, to save this next, not save, right, but to replace what we've had in previous generations, where it's like, all right, this is our generation's moment to shed off bullshit that happened from before and become successful. You know what I mean? I only see young kids struggling right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of it goes back to getting to the value of hard work, man. Like people don't put value in hard work. They look down on it. And I think that's a giant societal thing that needs to be changed, right? They don't see value in hard work, value in competence, value in ability. And, that's one of the major things in Atlas Shrugged that Ayn Rand puts as one of the principles, that there's no people of ability or people that are able to do anything, just people that can say, oh, I can't do anything about it. It's somebody else's problem. I think it really comes back to, it's a parenting thing, right? Mm-hmm. My kids are younger, so it's, I'm not a super expert at this. I know other people out there probably are. But I think it comes back to, putting value in hard work, putting value in, what you can create and what you can do, and not depending on other people for things. We have 30 chickens here, so we get a dozen eggs every morning. We make our own bread. We do all that kind of stuff. And I think you have to have a level of self-sufficiency and a level of that you're giving to your kids. I was lucky that my parents gave that to me because, my mom didn't end up going to college because her dad got cancer senior year of high school. So she, ended up not going. And my dad didn't finish because he was one of those kids that started trouble all the time. And frankly, I learned the value of not just hard work, but smart work. And I think a lot of people don't have that. And that is the number one thing that is killing our country. Everybody wants to do it easier. Everybody thinks that somebody else is, got it easier than them, and they're trying to figure out how to do it. When we should look at what difficult things can we do and how can we improve from those things. But a lot of people don't want to do that, man.
Yeah, this is the speech I give about for the growing number of right-leaning libertarians that I see, especially in the millennial and the Zoomer age group. But you've got to, in your own life, you have to be proactively solving problems. Certainly, every step you take that doesn't require assistance from somebody else, one, makes you stronger and also insulates you from their influence over your life, which is, I think those are two really important things. If you value liberty and autonomy and shit. And then the other part of that is the relationship that we now have with government. I think if you ask somebody, if you had asked one of us, myself or you, back in the 90s when we were in high school, or middle school, whatever grade you were in then, explain what it is to be an American, you would probably have an answer to that question. Now there are going to be disparate answers, certainly, probably based on your political affiliation or your race or your geographical location in the country. I'm sure you would get disparate answers, but everybody, I think, would have some kind of answer, and I think the vast majority of them would be positive. Now, I don't think that, like, a 15-year-old today, high school student, I don't know that they would even have an answer to that question in a lot of places across America right now. It's a big problem, right? Because you can't, it can't become part of your identity if you can't fucking define it. And I think it's important, not from a nationalistic standpoint, but from a pride standpoint, insofar as G.K. Chesterton said that that men didn't love Rome because she was great. Rome was great because the men loved her, right? It's a broken window theory kind of situation. I think that's really important to people. And they now see the government as some external entity that does something. It's very elusive to wrap your hands around exactly what government does, aside from just robbing you, I guess. But the second part of that statement is that if you want to limit the size of government, and it's not about the relative size, it's about the power, obviously. But if you want to limit the power of government, there's really not easy, but there's very efficient ways that nobody can stop you from doing to do that. And one is to solve problems before the government shows up, right? So if there's problems in your community, go fucking solve that problem. Because when the government shows up and nobody has a handout, they don't have any power there, and they know it, right? So this reliance on everybody else, this general attitude of somebody's got to do something, is really a problem now. And I don't know if it's an effect of the education system, or if it is just, I mean, I'm sure it's a confluence of things, but seeing people successful on social media for having done very little, probably is like, well, that's not fair. That should be me.
But I think also it's like this idea, I don't know if you're familiar with the fourth turning concept at all, but it's this idea of the farther away we get from hardship, the less hard we get as a people. And, when you look at it, hard men create easy times and soft men create hard times, right? It's kind of this strange situation we're in as well. So we're so far away from what it means to have to actually struggle with something, where we've had all this abundance through the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And we didn't really learn how to do for ourselves and provide for ourselves. And I know it's one of the principles of the show, the Ben Franklin quote, where he talks about sacrificing your liberty for security. And that's what we continue to do, man. We continue to sacrifice our liberty for security. And if you look at what happened after the Patriot Act, after 9/11, we gave away so much of our ability to do anything for ourselves. And most people are like, yeah, Patriot, I love it. Let's do it. But, they use flowery language to confuse you. And most people, the problem is, most people will not read those bills. They won't look into that information. They won't understand what the government is doing. And I think that's what it comes down to, man. So then we only have ourselves to blame because we won't take a few minutes to read something. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, and then, obviously opportunists are going to take advantage of that. They're going to write a 2,000-page bill and then give it to you 6 hours before a vote and say, hey, we need to vote on this.
Well, it was like the Jobs Act with Pelosi. So we need to pass the bill so we can show you what's in it. And that's crazy,
it's
man.
Crazy. That is truly an imbecilic way of communicating to people. But they will only talk to people like that if they know people will accept that. There will be some folks who are like, no, whatever. But it's like, no, we got to trust our government. I'm sorry, what document from which founding father did you read that told you to trust the fucking government? Because I've read them all and I don't remember hearing that phrase.
I read the Federalist Papers, man. It's not in there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a bit much. How would you describe where you fall on the political spectrum? Because I like to ask people that
I'm
now
fucked.
because
That's where I am.
It's
like I'm fucked.
Yeah.
Because I look at it and it's like, Republicans don't like me because I'm not Republican enough, and Democrats don't like me because I'm not Democrat enough. I'm very fiscally conservative, but I'm socially pretty liberal. You know what I mean? Like it's like, but I'm not a libertarian because I don't know that we necessarily should be decriminalizing drugs. I think we should look at it a little bit differently. And a big part of it is education, but it's difficult because, I look at kind of the Sean Hannity Republican side of things and it makes me want to throw up. But then, yeah, man, I don't know how to describe where I am. I'm somewhere in the middle, but like I'm left on some issues, right on some issues, and I try to do what morally feels good to me.
What can you explain what you mean by socially liberal? Because I think for some of the younger members of the audience, it'd be helpful because I don't think that phrase has the same meaning maybe it has no meaning at all to them, but it definitely doesn't have the same meaning that it had 10 or 15 years ago. Now it's very different.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of times people want the government to tell other people what to do, and that's more of a conservative thing. Like this person can get married or that person can't get married, or this person can do that or that person can't do that. Frankly, I don't care if it doesn't get in my way. And a lot of people see that as a very, I guess, liberal viewpoint in a lot of ways, because, if you look at what Republicans want to do a lot of times, they want to regulate everything. And I think at a certain point, like, I don't even think the government should be, giving out marriage contracts, because that's between you and your spouse and your church and your God or whoever it may be. Like, that's not really a public thing to say. But I think the state has stepped into too many parts of people's lives and tried to tell us what we can and can't do. So, I don't care if someone wants to get married to somebody they love. Whatever, man. I don't care if, as long as you're not doing it in my house. Like, I think too often people want to tell other people what they can't do, and many times it doesn't affect them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. But you do care if people do drugs in their homes.
Well, yeah, because I think that becomes kind of a larger societal issue, because that can become a downward spiral. If somebody gets addicted to drugs, they get a drug problem, all of a sudden they pull other people into it. I think that can be a problem. But I think...
Well, how do you apply that logic to diabetes then, since 38% of all Americans are either diabetic or in pre-diabetes?
That's rough. Okay, you got me on that one, because at the same time, I think we need to do more education, right? And have people make a choice. But I think we don't do a lot around education. We just let these, like, if you look at the food pyramid, the food pyramid was put together. Yeah. The food pyramid was put together by the companies selling you the shit. Yeah. So I think that the point is we need, the point is like, what to me, it always comes down to education. You give people information, you give them real information, good information, you let them make a choice. Whatever choice they want to make, that's up to them.
So maybe we should spend more time policing the information that people are putting out and less time policing actual people. You know what I mean? Because if it seems like...
Yeah, but the tough part about that too then is you get the Information Governance Board too. It's like you're fucking away.
Yeah. That's certainly true. When I say we should police them, I mean the public. There's you do that with your time and attention, right? Like those are the two things that belong to you. If you're a fan of Ayn Rand or any of the old Austrian libertarian ideologies, you'll understand that the most important property right is yourself, your own body, right? Your time, your mind, basically. And we freely give those two things over to things and people who do not deserve them, probably more than we do the opposite of that, right? Like it's I truly believe we're living in the dumbest period in human history. Because we have so much, not only the internet, not just all the information. It's not that I can just go look something up. It's that ordinary people have a large voice now, and they routinely expose institutions for being as corrupt as we've always known they were, right? It's not like you can't play ostrich here anymore. We know that these things are fucked up. We know that all this stuff that happened with COVID was bullshit, that doctors who had been prescribing off-label medicines for 80 years. You know what I mean? The same drug for 80 years, all of a sudden it's horse paste and shit like that. Like we know, we know all of this now, and still people's minds rebuke what they see right in front of their faces. Is it just? I can't figure out what it is, because my brain is immediately just like, no, that's fucking stupid, and it doesn't.
Well, I think the difficulty in it is we want a free market economy, which I do. But if you look at it, you also have, I think a big part of it is getting rid of lobbyists. I think that was what it actually is, because if you look at it, like, companies should be able to grow. They should be able to do things. They should be able to take risks if they want to. But at the same time, I think that the way lobbyists work, they've got so much of a control of pharma. Pharma's got so much of a control of our politicians. They've got all this money out there and things like that. And because of that, they're able to control who gets the information, right? The information is controlled by how much money you're giving a politician. And I think when it comes down to it, if you can get that money out of it, it's going to get a little bit better. Like, direct to consumer advertising is one of the worst things that ever happened for prescription drugs, because your doctor a lot of times is getting a money or a trip or whatever from the drug company that's doing it, and then you're getting marketed to on TV to tell them you want it. So at the same time, we need to figure out how to separate the information from those that have the ability to benefit off that information. Does that make sense? Because they're basically paying for it, and they're saying, like when we looked through the pandemic, everything was brought to you by Pfizer, and you're supposed to expect that you're getting down the road information.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's been all of digital media has always been about that. I mean, General Electric designed the television just so they could, promote their other products. That's what it was about, and it started before that as well. I mean, we have these romantic ideas about, the good old days in America, but in the later part of the 19th century, Rutherford B. Hayes got help from Western Union to essentially steal an election, right? To make sure that Reconstruction didn't happen in the South the way that some people wanted it to, I guess. So this has been going on a long time, and I wanted to bring it up because you've got some expertise in early Roman propaganda. I wonder have you ever read the book The Attention Merchants by Tim Wu?
I have not, but I'll have to check that out.
Yeah,
it's a
you
cool
should check
title.
it out. I mean, he goes into how the snake oil salesman marketing that happened in the later part of the 19th century, that was the game plan, essentially, for all the political advertisements that you used to hear back in the early part of the 20th century. That was the playbook, was exactly like how these traveling snake oil salesmen would operate. It's like we'll use the same kind of language. You know what I mean? Like and it's like weaving in scientific language with unscientific language, but not in a way that makes any sense, but it sounds official. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on there. And tell me about the parallels you see between early Roman propaganda, not early Roman, but Roman propaganda, and then what's going on today. Are there parallels?
Well, I think a big part of it is, if you look at, like, Caesar, Augustus Caesar, how he convinced people he was God, was number one, positioning himself with different spiritual beings. So, like, his adopted father, Julius Caesar, had convinced people he was, related to the god Venus, because that was apparently believable in that time period. So that was kind of one part of what he had. But then he also observed a lot of what Pompey the Great had done, and Pompey the Great was obsessed with Alexander the Great. That's why he called himself the Great. And so he had modeled himself off of that. And when he actually won the Battle of Actium over Mark Antony, this is talking about Augustus, he actually went and prayed before the sarcophagus of Alexander the Great. And everybody's like, wow, that's kind of weird, because he had observed this competition between his father, Julius, and Pompey for who was actually going to be in control. And he said, okay, I'm going to position myself as kind of this godly Alexander type figure. So he had figured out how to position himself in that way. The other part about it is he was on every piece of money. He was on every piece of decision making. No one could go any place without getting to see the emperor. And I think that's a lot of what started to happen with being president. Is being president, the power has centralized, right? It's not in Congress like it should be anymore, right? Like, you can see the president can do, through the War Powers Act, he can do different things he should not been able to do. And you're seeing the power start to centralize, where you even look at a lot of what happened with Obama. People treated him like he was divine. And I think that's the best example of what we're seeing is it becomes this person that's going to save you, that's going to be divine and it's going to do things for you. You know, I love Donald Trump, but there's a lot of people out there that seem to think that he's, you know, God's gift to this country. I'll tell you right now, he's just a dude. But I think that we've gotten to this position where we're willing to accept this Messiah-like character. And that is exactly how Roman emperors made themselves, you know, divine to people. They made themselves their Messiah.
Yeah, I think that's the hero worship shit is kind of where
Yes.
where our political systems in the West devolve pretty rapidly because, you know, you put yourself in these positions where you have to defend indefensible positions because you're somehow related to this political party or candidate. And the odd thing about it is, this might even be the most destructive part of it, is that the left isn't really the left anymore and the right's not really the right anymore. You know what I mean?
No, the
like
political spectrum's gone.
Yeah. This alleged conservatism, fiscal conservatism, I haven't seen it in a while. You know what I mean? Since probably Eisenhower, maybe. I don't remember. Maybe some to some degree in Nixon's duration, but certainly not in Reagan's. He wasn't physically conservative.
Well, Nixon took away the gold standard, so he screwed us too.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. So maybe Eisenhower was the last real conservative president we had. Like I just fighting weird wars all over the place and spending money, and then you know, Republicans presided over the largest expansion of the federal government in American history, and the largest
because you
expansion
look
of the
at it,
police
the
state as well.
The political spectrum's broken. Like there is no left and right anymore. What people don't understand, and G. Edward Griffin talks a lot about this. On one side of the spectrum, there's collectivism, and collectivism has different forms that it shows up on. Right? There's communism, there's fascism, there's socialism. They're all different forms of collectivism. They get there in different ways, but they're collectivist. And on the other side of that, you have liberty. And the more you give away your liberty for the collective, the more you end up in one of those collective ideas. It's not left or right anymore, man. Like if you look at the Democratic Party now, it is not the party of JFK. That party does not exist anymore.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that's the real issue you're looking at. Because even if you showed today's Republican Party, the Republican Party 40 years ago, they'd have a heart attack because we have become about so much control in our lives. And that's why I think the two-party system is just a bad thing for us. Because if you look at it, it creates an Overton window. And in Overton window, you show people two options and they have to pick one of them. And one of those options still takes them closer, you know, to this more totalitarian goal. Whereas if you gave people different options, they could be like, well, I like that one a little bit better, that one a little bit better. But third parties are just not a possibility here. And you even look at like what they've done to third party candidates. You know, they in I think it was the 2012 election when Gary Johnson was running as a libertarian, they changed the requirements so Gary Johnson couldn't be on the debate stage. So that the system is so set up on two parties, they're able to kind of move us wherever they want because there's not more than two options.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, it isn't just the right, the political right, obviously. The left is the same. I mean, that's probably why JFK was clipped because he didn't want to escalate in Vietnam. And, you know, by the end of Obama's tenure, he had committed, I think, 4,500 deaths through drone strike. And then he had deported more people than all presidents, former presidents combined. Like he had deported more people than all previous presidents combined. And then you get to, you know, Trump, who allowed Fauci to bend his ass over and the country, frankly.
Yes.
And he's still out there taking credit for a vaccine that's absolute bullshit.
It blows my mind, man. Like I like so many things he's done. And I just don't get it. Is it his ego? Like, why can't he get over that and say, you know, guys, I rushed this thing. Maybe I shouldn't have rushed this thing. It's hurting some people. I'm sorry. But he just can't do it. I don't know
think
why.
It would be a very powerful message for him to say, I trusted these people too much and I won't make that fucking mistake again. He refuses to say, like behind closed doors, that's what his staffers will say. That, he's not naive this time. He really will drain the swamp this time. It's like, all right, well, cool. That'd be nice to hear from him, frankly.
Yes.
Because he's supposed to be the goddamn leader.
Yeah, and it's even, I don't know if you saw the Megyn Kelly interview recently. Like, he did the same thing. And then after that interview, he talked about her being a very nasty person. And it's like, I don't know, dude. Like, I feel like we just don't have any good options out there at this point.
Well, there are good options, and that is to, you know, take control of your local governments. And
yes.
Then, so this is my plan. I'll run this by you. You can give me some feedback on this.
Well, no, and I'll say first off, I appreciate that because it seems like every general I interview says start local.
Yeah, well, you definitely should. I mean, it's why that's my main beef with libertarians is that they're always trying to run people for president. Like, what would a libertarian president do exactly? End the presidency?
Nothing.
Like, I mean, that would be the ultimate goal, right? But anyways, people have to take control of their local governments and start the process of nullification. Like our if we are indeed, and I agree with you, I think we are in a collectivist versus populist war right now, and it has nothing to do with
Yes.
political sides. I think it needs to get back to being a war between political sides because that is what keeps us sharp, healthy, and on the middle road, to use an old British phrase. But like the right and the left, the mom and the dad, just giving us the two things we need, nurturing and fucking guidance. Anyways, but starting at the local level, taking over politics in your local level. And then when a higher authority, but be it the county, the state, or the federal government, comes looking for shit, you tell them to go fuck themselves. And people they hear that idea and they think it's all, you could never do that. That's crazy. That's the government. It has been routinely done over the last 20 years in multiple states, California and Massachusetts, especially with both gay marriage and with weed, right? They for 20 years, told the federal government to go fuck itself. Like, we're not following those rules. You got a problem with it, come do something. And what the government do? They didn't do a goddamn thing because they know they can't. The government, federal government especially, their power is like Tinkerbell. And it only exists if we all believe it exists. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because here's what they're not going to do in the United States. This may work in other countries that have an authoritarian bend, but the military is not going door to door here. That ain't happening. You know what I mean? It's just not good. These are my people. That's not happening. As a matter of fact, if the government told us to do that, we would take the government down, frankly.
But here's my question about that. Like, do you think, because I know especially after the mandates and stuff with COVID, I feel like they've been pushing a lot of the good guys out.
Sure.
And you look at, I don't know if you saw the freaking guy wearing the dog mask that was in the Air Force or some shit like that.
Yeah.
Like I feel like they're pushing a lot of this stuff, and even Milley, for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is actually retiring this week, I think. But I think a lot of that stuff's been pushed on our military. That, like, I guess, do you think we're still there? I guess is my question, because I think they're trying to force the good guys out.
I guess it depends on what you consider the military to be, right? I mean, certainly they've through mandates and through woke nonsense tried to gerrymander the ranks of all the institutions that protect us, whether it be first responders or the military or masculinity itself, right? This is certainly a concerted effort to do that. But there's still tens of thousands of people like me cruising around in regular life just waiting for something to pop off, you know what I mean? So I'm not terribly concerned with that shit, frankly, because the fucking blue hair dude they send to my house, he's not making it home. You know what I mean? That's just how that's going to go. But anyways, there's a clear blueprint for this stuff where you call it capture a local political institution and refuse to play ball with people who are trying to take advantage of you. That's all you have to do. We see it in cancel culture as well. As talked about on the last show, but Charles Barkley says there's a lot of fat women in San Antonio. Well, guess what? San Antonio is the third fattest city in America, and it's the seventh largest city in America, which makes it the fattest city on earth. So yeah, there's some fat women there. There's quite a few, as a matter of fact. Probably more fat women in San Antonio than any other city in the world. And they were like, oh, you can't fucking say that. And not that I agree with Charles Barkley and everything politically. He's kind of a knucklehead, to use his own phrase. But he just said, fuck you. I don't care what you think. I said what I said, bitch.
What tells me you're right is if you look at the actions of the FBI, if you look at what they're doing, that tells you you're right. They're going after what they call, domestic extremists. Domestic extremists is one part of it. They're going after parents that go to school boards. Well, that tells me that we're doing the right thing at the school boards, right? They're going after people that are pro-life or whatever. So they're going after different things they see as a threat to their power. So that would tell me that they're basically telling you, hey, these are the exact things that you should be doing because they're a threat to our power. Am I correct?
Yes, 100%. And it is, the power of the public, the power of populism is collectively saying no, right? We saw it with, you mentioned the governance disinformation governance board, whatever the fuck it was called.
Oh, that lady was a nut job too. Have you seen her singing?
She's absolutely crazy, yeah. They announced that this was going to happen, and everybody from every political angle lit their ass up for about 2 weeks, and then she got fired, and they ended the program, which had never.
You know what her job is now, by the way? She's a registered agent of the British government. You can look it up. She had to under the Foreign Registration Act. She is registered working for the British government now.
Well, you know, it's funny you mentioned that because Hillary's out on the stump this past weekend on MSNBC talking about how we should pay really close attention to the 2024 election because it's probably going to be Russian interference. Just as a reminder, this woman used DNC money to pay another registered agent of the British government, Steele for the dossier. He was literally a fucking foreign intelligence officer. She paid him using DNC funds to fabricate Russian collusion. And we all know that now. We all know that it was fake. Everybody knows that it was fake, including people on her side who have criticized her for it. But she's still on a major news channel talking about it like it's a real threat, one. And two, like, oh, you guys are crazy for not believing this. You can deny it all you want, but it's happening. No, it's not. We know you paid for it. You stupid bitch. Like, what the fuck?
She paid a small fine for it, too.
A little fine, yeah. No fine for smashing the blackberries and for some reason pouring bleach on them. I'm not sure what that does. By the way, if you're out there committing crimes, don't pour bleach on blood. If you're trying to get rid of it, it doesn't work. Ammonia works, and alcohol, isopropyl alcohol works. Just if you're trying to clean up a crime scene, is all I'm saying. All bleach is going to do is smear your DNA around. They're still going to be able to find it. Just you know.
I'm trying to find the exact article for you here now, too, because what Nina Jankowicz does now.
Oh, is it? Yeah. What exactly is she doing for the British government?
So she's a registered agent for the UK Parliament. She does one of their disinformation things now. It's just the Center for something. Give me a second here.
Wow, I'm surprised she didn't get snapped up by Canada because they're pretty into it as well. I mean, of course, when they're not giving standing ovations to Nazis.
Yeah, what the heck is the group she works in? There's it's a policy group she works in. It doesn't mean she works for the government.
Sure,
but what happens is when you're working for an organization that's registered in another country, like Hunter Biden needed to but didn't, you have to register as an agent of that country. So it's
Foreign
it's
Registration
there's
Act, yeah. It's
it's under Foreign Registration Act.
Why do you?
Center for Information Resilience is who she works for right now. She's the vice president.
They really stretch on those fucking titles. I mean, that's some gymnastics right there. Good Lord. Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, that's not surprising.
So anyway, I apologize. I pulled you off a target there, man.
No. I mean, it's that's all really important. I think it's like the ability to collectively say no is the most powerful thing that a community can do. You know what I mean? Because it's going to be difficult to say yes to things. It should be difficult to say yes to things because you need to get consensus, and that the process of getting consensus is how we filter out bad ideas. It's supposed to be how we filter out bad ideas. But you also have to realize how disparate the country is, right? That's why we have federalism. That's why we have the 9th and 10th Amendments. You know, they're very specific and pointed in that direction. But there is this human inclination, and Republicans historically had done it for a very long time, and now it's kind of the left doing it. But people want to have control over other people for some reason. And I don't know if that's something intrinsic to humanity or if it's something that's programmed into us somehow. Or it's just like our worst fears, the worst characteristics about human beings are just being manipulated by people in power to make us want to control other people. But frankly, I don't give a shit what other people do. As long as you're not fucking with kids or something, I don't give a fuck what you do.
Frankly, I think it's the worst thing that a human being can do.
Yeah.
And to me, it's kind of crazy with, the amount of stuff that started to come out about, trafficking in children. And you see, the government is taking away funding from it and all other sorts of stuff. It's like a little bit crazy to me. Anyway.
Yeah, it is crazy. So, you're a bit of a student of history. Do you remember a time in human history where we were at a position similar to what we're in now? And then maybe what happened?
I don't know if I have an answer for you that one, other than like if you look at, the Weimar Republic and how they kind of spent money. Because I look at the economic side of things. If you look at how the Weimar Republic kind of spent themselves in the hyperinflation after the treaty for the First World War, that's where we are. And I think the problem is people think because the American dollar is still like, quote unquote, the strongest dollar in the world. But if you look at it, the BRICS countries and things are raising, there's a big threat to that because we've showed people, especially by what we've done with Russia and the in Ukraine conflict, of how we try to use the US dollar as a weapon, then why do people want to invest in it? And the only thing that allows us to spend money we don't have and keep running up the credit card is the fact that we're the reserve currency. If we lose that, we're fucked overnight.
Oh,
So
yeah.
to me, that's the thing I look at, is I look at economically, we can only spend like this so long, because that's how, the Weimar Republic fell after the First World War. It's how, the Roman Empire fell, was they basically ran out of money to be able to run their army, and then everybody else just kind of came in and took over. So we're in trouble if we don't handle economic policy. But the problem is, it seems like nobody even wants to do it. We're running up against this 9:30 deadline to do something about the budget, and instead Kevin McCarthy's saying, well, we're considering writing an impeachment for Joe Biden. It's like, well, how about we take a look at the budget, look at individual budget spending bills, and start to vote on them one by one, rather than passing another stupid omnibus, because that is how we ruin our country, by ruining our money.
Well, they're not going to be able to call a vote, and then certainly not going to be able to win a vote on an omnibus bill unless they let it go down to the wire. They know exactly.
That's how they do it every time, man, because they're like, oh, it's desperate. We saved your life. You got your Social Security. How do you feel about it? Good.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think, I wonder about this, because I think of the Weimar Republic as well. Do you think the economic issues precipitate the authoritarianism, or is it the opposite of that? You know what I mean? It's like, are we authoritarian so we, I don't think any smart authoritarian would create hyperinflation, but the Weimar Republic really did it. I mean, they fucked themselves up big time.
But it also, you have to look at the treaty for World War I as well. Like the treaty for World War I, they were paying so much money to France they didn't have, that it helped to create that situation, right? So then it creates a situation where people are looking for someone to save them. And that's in a situation we're in right now, and where people are looking for someone to save them. They're looking for, as we said earlier, a messianic character at some point, somebody that's going to pop up and save them all. And that's, every emperor billed themselves as that. You look at, von Bismarck billed himself as that, and that's what actually led us to someone like Hitler. So it puts us in a situation where people are looking for a savior, so they'll accept just about anything, man. So I don't think it's that. I think corruption precedes the economic problems, and it leads to a situation where someone can actually come in that wouldn't typically be accepted.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a hard time imagining what character would be ubiquitously accepted today. You know what I mean? And I don't know how popular Hitler really was amongst the general public after, the late 20s, early 30s, before he became chancellor, and then when he became chancellor. It's hard to say how much of that was people were afraid because they knew he was a fucking lunatic, versus people who actually supported it. I know there was some pretty widespread support.
He grabbed the wheels of power so fast and so violently, right? With the Knight of Long Knives, he kills all of the people that had resisted him. Yeah. So at that point in time, it's like, what kind of resistance are you going to put up to somebody that can kill you at the point of a gun?
Sure, yeah. And then, of course, he immediately weaponized one of the more, to that point, sophisticated propaganda machines in the history of the world. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, I think they were the first propaganda machine to have a literal film department, who was essentially a cabinet level member of the government, who was specifically like, hey, here you go, make some war films. We need those and shit like that. Yeah. So then, if that's the case, how do we insulate ourselves from that stuff? Because we are on a dangerous stretch of highway right now.
Well, number one, what you were talking about, get involved locally. I've had General Mike Flynn tell me that. I've had Colonel McGregor tell me that. I've had Colonel Mannis tell me that. Get involved locally. That is the number one thing you have to do. But from there, I think it's also like taking care of your family and not depending on others wherever you can, right? There's some areas where you have to cooperate others, and it is what it is. But I think getting involved locally and taking care of your family is a big deal. Taking care of your family values, making sure your kids have the ability to think for themselves and do for themselves. And that's why I think right now homeschooling is the best option. It's not the easiest option. Sure. It's definitely difficult to do, but where we live, it's a homeschool group, and it's a bunch of parents working together to figure things out. So I think that's important too, but it starts in the home, man, and it starts locally. If you can do those things, you can do something about it. But I think thinking that, in 2024, we're going to vote for some messianic character that's going to save us, that is the exact thing that takes us to our own destruction. We have to start locally. Yeah.
Isn't that very obvious, though? Like, if you're a baseball, I use this analogy a lot. If you're a baseball player and your swing's fucked up, you don't typically go to like a home run derby to fix it. You break it down. You go back to fundamentals, right? And you break your swing down into the smallest possible parts and fix each one of those parts. And then you put it back together again. That's very obvious. We do that with everything else in life, except for, our grand political problems. Maybe it's too tough for people to do that. I don't know. But
Well, yeah, because you even look at like people are saying, oh, Democrats won last time because of the voter, ballot harvesting. We're going to do the same thing. No, that's what destroys it all. Like that's stupid. Like it's really stupid to say, okay, that's the game now. We're going to make it all about the game now. You have to figure out how to do the right thing and solve it rather than just, well, if that's how you're going to play, we'll play that way too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then on the other side of that, where the propaganda in the modern West is pretty effective. I mean, I don't understand why anybody supports what we're doing in Ukraine right now. It doesn't make any sense for our country to be involved in this shit. It doesn't make any sense for NATO either to be involved in any of this stuff. I mean, it's very bizarre to me, frankly, and I wonder what your take on that is.
Well, because most people don't realize how big of a part we played in it. You had the Orange Revolution in Ukraine that we played a part in. You had the 2014 Maidan Revolution that Victoria Nuland played a huge part in here as well. And you have Joe Biden that was saying, hey, if we can get the prosecutor fired, then, we'll give you the loan guarantee. We've had so much to do with what's happened in Ukraine, and most people just don't know about it. And our politicians have gotten rich off it. You have the Biden family, you have the Kerry family, you have Mitt Romney's son also made money off it as well. So you have so many of these guys are making so much goddamn money off laundering money in Ukraine. And then, of course, they're going to go to war if something is going because their piggy bank's going away. But most people don't know about this, and they've consumed so much propaganda, they're not willing to accept it. And I think that's the difficulty.
Yeah. Do you think I wonder if like the Gelman amnesia effect plays some role in it, or if it's
I'm not familiar with that.
It's like people will persist in trusting a particular institution, even if it shows itself repeatedly to be not worthy of trust, right? The example that was given to me was, imagine you're on the financial side of the New York Times or on the financial page of the New York Times, and you just keep taking stock advice, even though you're losing your ass every time you take the advice. But then you turn the page, you see the stock advice, like, well, it's a New York Times. I guess you should take this advice. You know what I mean? Or is it just a spent cost fallacy, or people, this is what I think it's the spent cost fallacy, but there's something emotional going on as well in there. People don't want to face the embarrassment or shame or humiliation of having to admit, you know what, we were fucking, not just were we wrong, but we were really wrong, and it fucked a lot of shit up, and now we've got to repair it.
Well, you look at what happened in Iraq, right? Like, we do all this stuff because there's weapons of mass destruction. And it turns out there wasn't any weapons of mass destruction. I think we get so far down there, we just got to keep going at that point in time, because to be wrong is really hard.
Yeah.
But to be wrong is also honest as well. And I think the problem is, we don't want to do what feels uncomfortable. And if you look at even when I'm going back to February of last year when the Ukraine war started, Fox News had freaking promotional packages ready the day it happened.
Yeah.
Like the propaganda was so strong that people bought into it so early that it becomes so difficult to change people's minds. Everybody had a Ukraine flag on their car and it was in their bio. And so it became kind of this thing that if you didn't support it, you were wrong, right? So people also don't want to think outside of the box.
Yeah.
It just puts people in a position where to be wrong would be terrible.
Yeah. Well, I don't give a fuck about Ukraine. Just in case anybody missed that part.
I was there in 2019, and I've met some really cool people, and I have some cool friends that are Ukrainian. But at the same time, when it shouldn't be in this fucking war, man, it's a waste of money. People are dying. It's stupid. And it's about politicians' corruption.
Yeah, that's all it is. Look, this has been a good conversation. We got to get out of here, though. Tell everybody where they can find you.
JeremyRyanSlate.com, and they can listen to me, I guess, run my mouth like I have been here, and I hope they enjoyed it today.
And you're on your show's called Command Your Brand, right?
Well, Command Your Brand's my company. Create Your Own Life is actually my show.
Oh, Create Your Own Life. Okay, sorry.
YouTube's the main place for making trouble over there.
Okay, and tell me about that show.
So it started really as like a personal development type of show, and then when the shit hit the fan in 2020, I started interviewing people like Mike Lindell and other people like that to figure out what's really happening in our world and what you really know. And it became more of a, you need to know what the game board of life looks like to play it well. So I want to talk about difficult things that we shouldn't be approaching because, you quoted G.K. Chesterton earlier, and one of the big things he said is the only two real things to talk about are politics and religion. So we try to talk about those things and let people make their own decisions.
Yeah, good. Well, you guys check them out. Say the website again.
JeremyRyanSlate.com.
Okay, JeremyRyanSlate.com. Check him out. Check out his show. Appreciate you coming on today. It's been great.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, man.
Yeah, anytime. And thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.